Today I want to demonstrate how to use MemTest86. This is a brand new stick of 16GB DDR4 3200 MHz RAM. I bought this very cheaply on AliExpress in the choice event on the start of May. It was priced as £20 plus VAT with £1.60 off for every £16 spent on choice items, and included in return a 15% off coupon against other choice items. It's 15% off the price of this RAM, which was 20 quid, as I said. So all in all, it works out about 20 quid if you haven't got any other coupons already. Well, actually, you're always going to have a coupon from the last stick RAM you bought. But yeah, it works out about 20 quid. But I got one for like 11 quid because I had a 10 quid off coupon at one point. And I thought, 11 quid? That's a bargain. 20 quid? Still way cheaper than 30 quid I'm looking at in England. So I bought another. In the UK, they're 30 quid for a 3200 meg stick. And that's the new or second-hand price. You smell it. It smells so new. It looks new. So I'll start to test. I give it the sniff test, and it smells like a newly opened packet of trading cards, chemically and sweet. I've got a MemTest86 stick plugged already in to this PC. And the way the case is, I have to lift it slightly to reach the power button. On this AMD rig, because of latency, it actually takes 5 minutes from power on before we see the first test running. Normally they run automatically. Very occasionally the boot up lands me in this menu screen, which is okay because we'd be coming back here after the longer tests have run. During those 5 minutes MemTest took to load, it was making its own tests and measurements. We see those on the system config information page. It's the latency and the speed it's measured. 13,631 megabytes per second and latency of 70.81 nanoseconds. And the whole 5 minutes measuring them. The full test should be about 4 hours. This varies by RAM speed and size. Typically, size scales with speed. So in this menu it's landed as in now. I can click View Detailed SPD Info. This will confirm the configured speed, but not the voltage that we're going to be running at. The voltage shown here doesn't ever change. I've found no metric here or in Windows which accurately depicts the voltage we just set in BIOS. Here the configuration we'll be running at is 3200 MT per S. And whatever voltage we set in BIOS prior to this boot, you won't have seen that. I don't remember it. It was for another stick of RAM. We saw this stick was freshly opened. Whatever MemTest tells us about voltage is naive. The first screen of SPD details is most useful. The third contains row, column, bank, rank and widths. The fourth contains timing and latency. I'll let the testing begin. On big brand RAM, bought domestically, I find errors in tests 5 and 6. I find these as I increase clock and decrease voltage gradually. These tests don't take too long to reach, about 5 minutes, less time than it took the stick to load. Their results are often the first thing I see after coming back from waiting for the stick to load. So I've had the rule of thumb of 4 hours for many years now. I used to leave it on overnight when electricity was cheap and plentiful then. Although this version of MemTest only runs 4 tests, so perhaps I was using MemTest86 plus. Nowadays electricity isn't ever plentiful or cheap. I've got a new approach to testing, which I might get into another bit, but I can summarise it now as you test a failure and then you back it off. So you get to your ideal frequency, your undervolt, which is kind on your CPU, and then you just undervolt until it fails, and then add a couple of steps back, add 200 millivolt back, and then you test it again, give it an hour, it doesn't fail then, I'll back off another 100 millivolts anyway, and test for 4 hours, yeah, and then you're good at that voltage, and then I'd probably run it another 100 millivolts above that. anyway, because RAM degrades. Over time it degrades. It doesn't get slower, it gets less tolerant of low voltages. It's how it degrades. Right, that looks good. Now we've got to reboot and trigger the BIOS setup and find out what that voltage was. Here we see frequency and voltage displayed prominently. The two columns can be a bit confusing. The left tells me what I just ran before we entered BIOS, and the right is what we would like to run. This is again odd. We've just seen 3200 MHz be run. We saw 32 MHz in MemTest's observed SPD settings. Changing a value on the right hand side here will cause the running RAM profile to update when we save and exit. The option above setting can be either auto or XMP. This is confusing as it won't be automatic when we make changes to the right columns. All XMP appears to do is load the XMP profile stored on this chip, which includes frequency, voltage and timings. I found a section of a video of this BIOS taken from another time and date, which doesn't have the awful clipping. This BIOS will attempt to verify the RAM configuration is sane before even booting as far as this screen again. The number of attempts it makes is configurable in the timing configuration below. And you can see that this field is called the fail count. So we get 3 fails before it loads a backup. I'll leave 3200 as the desired speed and choose 1.16 as the new voltage so that I can save changes and try this configuration. It's doomed, but it's a demonstration. Each time the fan stops, one of those attempts to boot BIOS has failed. After 3 stops it will pause whilst it reloads a safe configuration. The hard disk also stops. If we're going to be trying this much, it's prudent to disconnect. I'll skip ahead now to when MemTest has just loaded our default safe configuration. 1.2 volts and 2666 MHz presents an anemic 10.9 GB per second speed. It's new RAM, so I may as well test. I don't usually film it, so the time at which all tests complete their first cycle is useful if synthetic benchmarking figure, 39 minutes and 20 seconds. If we ever doubt those RAM speeds of 10.9, 13.3, we can take this throughput of a whole testing cycle, 39 minutes 20 seconds, and yeah, that should be proportional to the ratios between 10.9 and 13.3. On exiting MemTest, we're told it's releasing memory and it will take some time. It doesn't take long. Then it will ask us if we want to save the results. That will be an HTML file, which is good for archiving, but it's largely irrelevant. The details we need are right in front of us right now, the time it took and that it made no errors. As if our eyes might deceive us, we should probably take a photo. At least we've got a timestamp then, which is often more than can be said for saving to the memory stick from the computer, which may have had the CMOS battery removed recently and lost its time. I never use the benchmarking features of MemTest. It's primarily a test suite. If we want benchmarking, there are a lot more capable tools available in Windows. But let's have a look. With enough benchmarks stored to compare against, then I'm sure they could be useful. What we are seeing here is step size versus speed. What is step size? That's quite a good question. It's difference in memory addresses that we're accessing. It begins with 1, which means all access is sequential. If you think of measuring a hard disk's speed or a flash stick transfer speed, you might start with copying across a large file. A lot of tests, they start with a single large file because that ensures sequential access. Crystal disk mark or something like that. So that's what step size 1 is. It's totally sequential access. And as you go up in step size, the accesses become more random or fragmented, and the speed becomes dominated by latency. With the retest, we see that we've got a steady speed when we're skipping up to 8 bytes. Then we've got a minimum speed from 64 byte skips onwards. Benchmarking the writes, we've got a faster fall off from 4 to 32. These aren't great benchmarks, they neglect to mention the sample size, and appear to demonstrate the effects of cache and read-ahead buffer exhaustion. If you're interested, there are more test modes. The inconvenience of having to reboot to access MemTest is justified because it allows free reign to test all the RAM. And you may have noticed that the memory sizes reported by MemTest are 2 GB smaller than the installed module. I need to adjust the window that is shared with my iGPU. It's currently upping itself to 2 GB RAM. The problem with having a dedicated graphics card installed whilst running MemTest is power. I've seen MemTest take up to 100 watts, minimum of 40 watts. Here we are back in BIOS, and it looks like it was attempting to run at 3200 with 1.16 volts. That was exactly the setting we configured, and BIOS decided it wouldn't boot with. That poses a problem here because we have to know that what we see on the right isn't going to be used on the next boot because it has already been found unstable. I got so annoyed by this double talk that I would remove the battery and clear CMOS. We need to change just one setting and save to make BIOS have another attempt. I'm not going for 1.35 volts yet. 1.13 volts is a very ambitious undervolt. I'll be sure to fail at 3200 MHz. So sure to fail that I sped this up so you can barely see the fan stop 3 times, unless you use slow motion. For a time scale, we can remember that it takes 5 minutes to boot to the first test, and in the first test we're seeing 10.9 GB per second, which is exactly what we'd expect from a 266 MHz stick. I stopped testing at my earliest convenience. There is so much you can do with MemTest. Most of it is very slow and repetitive, but reliable. I hope you've learned something from this condensed example.